What is street art? Stay with me here. When we think of street art, each one of us has our own vision of it, right? For some, it's art, and for others, it's graffiti. This is one of those examples. And don't call it graffiti. Now, let's let our guest introduce himself.
Dale Graden, and I am a professor of history at the University of Idaho, commencing year 34. Hard to believe. I've been there for a long time. Um, and my interests are wide ranging and I would say eclectic. My research is on the transatlantic slave trade, abolition and freedom, slavery, freedom in the Americas. That's why I'm here in Rio doing some work on a book. I have a long-term interest in street art, and I will talk a little bit about that here today. It's been, I have, I like international soccer matches, so I'm in the right part of the world for that. And I teach a lot of courses at the University of Idaho, which include maybe 5 or 6 themes on history and film. So that ties also into the street art part. So
Yeah, and so let's get right into the street art. I think it's really fascinating. I recently moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and there is a ton of street art along the walls, the murals, that type of stuff. I'm interested to learn how how it's different from Latin American street art. So, what makes Latin American street art so unique?
yeah, that's a good question. So to answer that, I think it's important that we look into a little bit of history, and then,
Perfect.
if that sounds okay, and
I
then,
love that.
and that's going to be what sort of influenced my prism of looking at Latin American street art. So I do a course on modern Mexico, and I devote a good 3 to 4 weeks on the very famous muralist Diego Rivera, uh, Jose Clemente Orozco, and David Siqueiros. And these were sort of the precursors to muralism, okay, to street art. As muralists, they are the precursors in so many ways to Mexican street art, to international street art, to Latin American street art. Now, why is that? These folks are profoundly shaped by Europe. They come back to Mexico, particularly in the case of Rivera, who I know best. But they look around and they say, we like Cubism and we like what the Europeans are up to, but we really want to do something. We want to change the world. And by that, I mean, they come back and they say, we're going to really focus on Mexico, and Mexico's relationship to South America, and Mexico's relationship to the Caribbean, and Mexico's relationship to the United States, particularly, because all three of them come north into the United States and do very important works of art, which include, in the case of Siqueiros, in Los Angeles, street art, street murals in a sense, but we could almost, it's on the verge of being street art. So that's going to lead to the question, what's the difference between a mural and a street art? And I think it's a very fine line between the two. Anyway, these folks are looking inward. And by that, I mean, and when I say they changed the world, they're looking inward and they're saying, we want to affirm who we are. We want to affirm Mexicanidad. Mexicanidad. We want to affirm our people, our culture, our food, our race, our worldview. They all want to affirm the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. And I think this is so very important because they really are folks that are at the highest level of intellect, obviously the most extraordinary capacity to do art, I mean, mural painting is just intensive from morning till night. And these people painted and painted and painted. They're radical in so many ways. They are attracted to the Communist Party. They are attracted to understanding the Russian Revolution of 1917. They're profoundly shaped by the Mexican Revolution, wanting to affirm what Mexico attempted to do in the revolution, which was to break away from capitalism and elitism and the bourgeoisie emulating Europe and the United States and trying to do something for the common folk. So they're high intellect and they're also street muralists in so many ways. So that really plays a role in influencing what plays out in terms of Latin American muralism and Latin American street art. Now, I have to say one other point here, because I'm to lead into what I'm up to with regards to Latin American street art. So another guy that comes along far more recently is Banksy. And amazingly, I'm not religious, but I do subscribe to the idea that seek and you shall find. I follow a woman on YouTube, Itchy Boots. She's from the Netherlands, and amazingly, an hour ago, in preparation for my comments of today, I happened to look at her, and she driving around Bristol, England, where Banksy began, and stops at 5 different Banksy paintings of street art. And so I bring this up in humor, but also in profound seriousness, because he's a heavy hitter. He is the heavy hitter. He also influences me to pursue what does street art represent? Okay, and what does it do? So that's a long sort of, I'm trying to give an introduction to what's shaping me and my prism into street art. So I start going to Venezuela. I need, again, there's a part 3 to this. I had been coming to Brazil since the mid-1980s. And particularly in the case of Rio de Janeiro, there's an immense amount of street art around the city. You mentioned where you were at there in Alaska. I mean, we can name our city. There are several. Berlin, Los Angeles come to mind, Miami, and Rio has some really very rich street art. And I like it because very often it is not. It's not. What's the word I'm looking for here? It's not just sort of common art. It's not destructive art. It's really trying to say messages. And I think that influenced some of my interest with regards to really paying attention to what was going on in Caracas, in Venezuela. So my journey is moving along. I teach a course on social revolution, and along comes Hugo Chavez, who was, I can't, for time reasons, I can't go into a deep history of Venezuela, except to say that 1989, which tends not to be a big date anywhere else but in Venezuela, was what was known as the Caracazo, and where the street on a Monday morning, the street, the cost of buses in the street was going to go up, and a massive protest takes place against the government of Caracas. Maybe 1,000 people die. There's fantastic footage out there you can see, and it's put down violently. This protest is put down violently. Hugo Chavez witnesses this, and I would say it's one of the 2 points that affect this guy in terms of his agenda coming out of the military to enter into politics. He sees what goes on and he attempts a coup and it fails, and he's put in jail. He's let go after about 1.5 years. Don't hold me to that, but I can't remember exactly how long he sits in jail. And he says, okay, I'm going to run for the presidency. And he wins. He wins in 1998 and becomes president of Venezuela and is able to stay in power till 2013. Okay, So I'm looking at this, and I am following this from afar in the United States. And I'm saying, wow, this is quite interesting. This guy's proposing a whole bunch of very interesting projects, which is going to be that, we're going to feed everybody based on what he had seen. People were hungry. They were breaking into shops in the 1989 upheaval, revolt. They're carrying out meat on their shoulders back to their home because they're hungry. And he says, we're going to get food for everybody. We're going to have health care for everybody. We're going to make a new constitution, and we're going to have housing for everybody. And we're going to use the oil money in a beneficial way. Keep in mind now, it's an extremely wealthy country at that point. The amount of money coming into Venezuela through oil was just staggering. Now, for your listeners, whoever might be listening to this, and I'm hoping they might, please realize that I'm not making some sort of pro-Chavista agenda here. I am saying from the outset, there was massive corruption in Venezuela before Chavez. There was massive corruption under Chavez, and there has been massive corruption since.
Just a bunch of corruption.
At that point, I need to throw out, there's not one country in the world, except maybe Norway, where oil hasn't totally corrupted the society, starting with the United States, Angola, name your country, Nigeria, England, all of this money, Venezuela, Brazil, name the country. Oil is the sign of death in so many ways in terms of corruption. Okay. Along comes Chavez. Still at that point, Venezuela had a Fulbright Commission. Now, this is the humorous part about it because, I had already had a Fulbright. I'd already had two Fulbrights. I had a Fulbright to Brazil, and I pay homage. Who was Fulbright? Fulbright was a senator who protested the Vietnam War and said, we better do something about sending our kids abroad so they have some sense of what the hell's going on in the outside world, I think at that point, when I got my first Fulbright, there were maybe 20 senators who only had passports. I mean, it just gives you an idea how much of an island we were then and how much of an island we are still in so many ways. So I had one in 1985 to Brazil. I had another one back to Brazil to teach, 1999 to 2000. Dream come true, absolute dream come true. I'm still in touch with a lot of those folks. And I was able to write a book to help me to get tenure at the University of Idaho. And then, amazingly, I get a third Fulbright to Venezuela. Now, at that point, the Fulbright Commission was still in business. But things were starting, the very beginnings of, the tensions that were mounting between the United States. And I'd have to check the date, but I think it was only maybe 3 or 4 years later that they end Fulbright Commission in Brazil, in Venezuela. And so begins this massive devolution, if we're going to, the implosion of the relationships between Venezuela and the United States. And I have to throw out one other point, and then we'll get into the street art. And that is, I said that there were 2 key moments in Chavez's life. One was the 1989 upheaval, and the second one was the attempted coup against him, which I believe was 2002, which, he absolutely, they catch the military step in, they put him on a plane, they put him out to an island. He's really thinking he's going to be shot. And the people come into the streets, and they're forced in many ways to bring him back. He takes over, and he never forgives the United States. He never, ever gets over it. And there's a great documentary on this. The revolution will not be televised. Okay, incredible. Because there was an Irishman there doing a documentary during it. He couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. Now, there's one more point that I'm going to make, and then we'll get into the street art, and that is through this fantastic opportunity to teach at the Universidad Central de Venezuela, Central University of Venezuela in Caracas, I meet some students. Somebody informs me quietly that the students are half pro-Chavez and half anti-Chavez, so I better watch what I say in the classrooms. And I get invited up to a lunch at one of the students' house, way up in one of the barrios. Now, these are areas where you don't go in unless you know somebody, and they brought me up there. And the mother served a nice meal, but she was very standoffish. I didn't quite understand what was going on. But I kept my mouth shut. I just tried to be diplomatic. I get invited back up a couple of weeks later, and she's much more friendly. And she's basically says to me, I'm trying to feel you out. I don't know if I can trust you. And I said, look, I'm not CIA. I'm not FBI. I'm an historian here trying to do some research and to teach some good classes. And so please. And she said to me, the last time I saw her, she looked at me and says, I want you to go back to the United States and tell them one thing in their classes, and that is before Chavez, I had nothing up here in this poor area. Since Chavez, my daughter is at the best university in Venezuela. We have food. I have healthcare nearby here. So think about it. And, it really made a profound impression on me. Onward. Does this all sound good?
You're doing great.
We're floating along. Okay. So in the midst of all of this, I am there doing sort of a formal research agenda, which is exactly what I'm doing right here, where I go to an archive and I'm reading documents, photographing them, and it's a little bit difficult. And I'm realizing one of the key topics that I was interested in which was an 1812 earthquake in Caracas. I get there and there's already been a book published on it. So I'm looking around, and I also, for head reasons, am really enjoying walking the streets of Venezuela and traveling around the streets of Caracas. And I was able to do some traveling around in Venezuela. And the street art was blowing me away. So I had a camera with me and I start taking pictures. And I think in the course of 2008, when I am there on the Fulbright, I took somewhere around 10,000 photographs of just all sorts of street art. And that's inspiring me to really do my homework on what was being represented through this street art, who's behind it, what are the messages, what is the culture all about. And one student who was there at the Central University of Venezuela had been at the University of Idaho, so I was in touch with him. He, in turn, knows some people in one of the poorest areas of Venezuela, of Caracas, and introduces me to these folks. So again, I say to anybody who's listening, do not walk into these places alone. You've got to have an entree and be sort of led around and let people see who you are. They trust you. And so away it went. And I start photographing ceaselessly over the period of about 6 months and doing my research. I also, right near the archive where I was working in downtown Caracas, and again, I say my first words, seek and ye shall find. I see this older gentleman doing some painting. And, we get to be friends. I am invited to up into an area that I knew nothing about. And he led me to some of the most advanced street art in all of Venezuela, in all of Latin America. And before I go up there, one of the days when we're going to go up there, because you sort of walk and you pay money to get into a van, and then you go way up on the mountain, and then you walk your way down. And again, he's with me, but it was very interesting to me that it was very interesting to me that there are two people there before we depart who were looking me over. So these are Chavista friends of his, and it's basically a message to me is don't mess around. This is serious stuff, and I got the message loud and clear. So I go. So this was an entree. So why don't I stick with just the walk? Why don't I call it the walk? Coming down, and it's called the Street of the Spaniards, the road of the Spaniards, and it comes up from the coast, it goes over the mountain, and it comes down. And it was paid for by the mayor of Caracas when they had some good money, and a book was produced about it. So I'm photographing my brains out up there, and I went back up 3 or 4 times. I was very fortunate because I went up there a couple times alone, which is again a no-no. This is before good iPhone, so I had a camera on my waist. A couple people told me, be careful because a German film crew had come through and they had all their stuff had been taken. And who did they have? What did they have up there in those murals? My gosh, indigenous. They had portrayals exactly of what Rivera and Siqueiros and Orozco had been doing in Mexico in the murals, but they're doing it in street art. They had brought in a Chilean. They had brought in I'm trying to remember if there was also an Ecuadorian, but several Venezuelan artists are doing art about indigenous history, the arrival of the slave trade, the portrayals of Bolivar, the heroic history of Bolivar and the independence movement within Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution under Chavez. This is a big theme. I'm just so blown away. There's stuff on Salvador Allende, the coup of 1973 in Chile, being portrayed in this street art. So there are days that I went up there without even a camera. I'm just walking around looking at this stuff real closely. Again, a woman who is paralyzed up there. She has physical impediments. Had done some street art. Well, I get the word from my friend down on the street that she lives there. I knock on the door. She opens up the door. She has somebody open up the door, as I recall, for her. Incredibly, she invites me in. I do an interview with her about her work. I take pictures of her. And, she is basically with both hands impediment had done some street art on water, on boats out at sea, on historical figures within Venezuelan history. I'm just taken aback by this. Okay, so allow me to make one more person who pops up here. David, I'll just use his name, David. I'll leave it at that. He had also done a huge mural he's basically leading a group of artists. There were probably 6 of these folks. I go down there, I'm watching him paint Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Simon Bolivar, Rodriguez, some musicians from Venezuelan history. And I start chatting with the guy. Well, he says, look we have our own collective. If you want to come out and visit us, make an appointment and we'll come get you. Well, on a Saturday, they pull up on a motorcycle, 3 of them. I get on the back of a motorcycle. They take me to their place in a suburb. We'll call it a suburb of Caracas, poor, up in the barrio, and they've got basically a home base. They show me all over Caracas in the coming days. They took me on motorcycle rides all over Caracas. I photographed their art. I did a whole history of what they were up to and what they were trying to do. It was exhilarating. It was an extraordinary experience. It is some of the best moments of my life to be with these folks in terms of their commitment to the Chavista socialist revolution. Obviously, there was money that, they're able to get some support. And I ultimately go back 2 years later in 2010 and stay with them for maybe 2 or 3 months. I can't remember how long I stayed with them, and continued with interviews with them, seeing what they were up to. They led me to some other people in the journey. Okay, so I'm hoping all of that is sort of a stream of consciousness. Now I get into some of the key themes, if that's okay. Does this sound good?
I think it's crazy you got on the back of a motorcycle. You're a wild man. I would never.
Oh yeah, I mean these people were gems, and I've stayed in touch with them. Obviously, Venezuela's in difficult conditions, so I think a lot of that money dried up that enabled them to do the art. I haven't been able to get through to a couple of them, but nevertheless, I've noticed from various sources that there's plenty of street art still going up in Venezuela. So I guess I'm going to go part two. This is almost, in a sense, now part two. What are some of the themes? Well, I would say probably the predominant theme, because Chavez was absolutely believed in the cult of Simón Bolívar. Now, Simón Bolívar is the great independence hero. See, Garcia Marquez's novel, The General in His Labyrinth, brilliant novel based on the historical record. And so a lot of this art, is sort of bolstering, supporting, and, affirming Venezuelan history and what Simón Bolívar was able to accomplish in his heroic journey, which included going to Haiti. He looks around on Haiti after the Haitian Revolution, and Haiti helps him re-enter Venezuela and travel over the mountains. It's just an extraordinary story. And all of this is being portrayed in all sorts of street art throughout Caracas. And for people, this is the big message. For people, this is the big part, I think, of the message I really want to bring to this interview, which you graciously have enabled me to have, and that is, there's a whole lot of Venezuelans who don't have formal education, okay? Just like Mexicans, okay? Just like throughout Latin America. There's a whole lot of people. Right now, I'm walking the streets of downtown Rio, and it is rough. It is tough. It is not easy to get a formal education in this country if you don't have money. There's just not the scholarships. So in the case of Caracas, there's a whole lot of people who don't have formal education, but are looking at this street art, and there's profound messages being shared about history, about affirming Venezuela, about affirming the viewer, including, for example, people in the art who are mixed race. Hugo Chavez was mixed race. Hugo Chavez is mixed indigenous and black. The word in Spanish was that he was a zombo. And the elite in Venezuela, like throughout all of Latin America, and like Mr. I'll call him Agent Orange running the United States right now, is very light-skinned white. It's a very elitist white European prism. A guy like Chavez comes along and says, look I'm one of you. I'm from the street. And the street art is affirming this by including indigenous characters, black, Afro-Venezuelan characters, figures who played a role in the independence movement. All of this is so profoundly racially based and class based, and in terms of creating a message to the common folk. Now, again, your right-wing viewers out there, and they're probably going to seek this out because they're going to see my name. I need to premise this by saying, look at, there's all sorts of flaws with this. You can pick holes in all of this, but we still haven't figured out how to resolve issues of systematic structural poverty across the Americas. And I would say Hugo Chavez, with all the money that he had, was trying on a certain level to do that. Now, did he fail? I think he probably did. I think there were many flaws. Has Maduro failed? I think there's many profound flaws. But it really bothers me when people are criticizing these countries for what they're doing. When in fact we have these massive problems of poverty in the United States. We refuse to grapple with resolving it. And look at Medicare right now getting cut away on this most recent package. Okay, so race and class and history are being affirmed. I would say a fourth affirmation in Venezuelan street art, and this goes across the Americas, across Latin America, is going to be culture. In other words, what is culture? And, from the simplest symbols of indigenous art, of Black art, of rural art, of campesino art, of art from the countryside being portrayed in the street art of the cities, because so many people had been coming in. The history of the 20th century is urbanization in Latin America. So many people from the countryside who are poor, ending up in barrios or favelas, whatever the words, ranchos. There's a wide variety of words that we're going to use here. They're looking around and they're seeing musical interests, musical instruments being portrayed in street art, which they know from their growing up in the countryside. They're seeing symbols and figures from the countryside, hats, clothing in the street art, which resonates with them. And it's drawing them into an urban milieu whereby they're in some way, in some small way, being affirmed of their journey. They're being affirmed of their journey. There's some of my best street art photographs are of the favelas, of the barrios, the ranchos, the poor houses, okay, which then are incorporated into the street art. So we're talking about how is it that let's take a look at this through the prism of compassion, through what is education. What is an educated person? I look at all these formally educated people who know absolutely nothing as far as I'm concerned, who just are a disaster in terms of what they're imposing upon U.S. society and Latin American societies. Let us look at what some of the messages are from the artists. Now, I hope all of this is sounding helpful.
You're doing
and
great.
Informative.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's really fascinating because America does have a really big impact on a lot of these Latin American countries. And there's a variety of ways in which we've impacted these countries and, destabilized these regions.
Absolutely. Listen, I've been down here for a couple of months now. I have never, in my 40 years of coming in and out of Brazil, I have never seen such power of U.S. media, English language, U.S. foreign policy, U.S. politics, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, there are nights on national news here that I feel it's more about the United States than it is about Brazil. It just blows my mind. And the other thing, again, now this would be related to street art. There's a saying that I had never heard before on the street here, and that is, a lot of Brazilians with money, when they go to Orlando, they want to go up to Disney World or wherever, Florida, Miami, and the there's a saying of, yeah, we went so that we can say we went when we got back. So they went for a visit, but they want to get back, but they want to be able to say, hey, we went. Which is sort of interesting. So I want to stay with just a couple more of the themes, if I may.
Absolutely.
And that is, because you brought it up quite actually, a profound theme of the street art. I do a whole chapter of this in my book entitled, Street Art in Revolutionary Venezuela. And one of the chapters is on anti-imperialism. So they know their history of anti-imperialism. I have attended some very interesting public discourses, public presentations where, the whole thing is pro-Allende, pro-Chilean. They haven't forgotten Salvador Allende, where they're sort of chanting against the United States for what the United States has done with regards to Venezuela, pro-Fidel, pro-Cuba, pro-Nicaragua, all of the axis of evil from the United States perspective. And I just think it's real important to, be paying attention to all of that. Why is that occurring? Well, there's a long history of imperialism within the United States. And I would suggest media is a profound continuation of, imperialism in terms of money, in terms of message, in terms of bias, etc. The other one that I wanted to bring up, that it was a joy to look over some of my work, that I've done in the past on street art, and that is there's a number of beautiful portrayals of various musicians, Venezuelan musicians. Ali Primera was, Hugo Chavez said he was himself an Ali Primerista. And this is a guy who died, unfortunately, at a young age in a questionable accident, who was very pro-Chavez. And, he's singing about what's going on in terms of the common folk of Venezuela. And there's a statue of him. There's some art where you see him playing his guitar in the streets. Now, a lot of this stuff, when I got to Venezuela in 2008 for my year there, I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about this stuff. So I am drawn into it very quickly, being led around by some of these friends through the university, thank goodness, some of the students, and, really did my homework quickly to try to get a handle on, who are these people and what do they represent and what's their message. So I would say those are some of my key themes. I want to go back to something at the beginning of my comments, and that is I came to the University of Idaho in 1992. I met some great colleagues who were into, incessant travelers. And this is the time. This is before internet. Okay, this is before digital cameras, et cetera, et cetera. And they show me one of their thousands of slides, and the slide my colleague Joan West had taken in Mexico City. It was a slide of an indigenous woman, because you can tell by her clothing, her race, her hair, and she has her baby in front of her. And she's looking at a Diego Rivera mural. So this is an indigenous woman who's not been formally educated, and she's standing there looking at one of the murals. And, it just said to me, it just touched me so very deeply, all that 35 years ago, 34 years ago, 30 years ago. It touched me so deeply in terms of what can visual art do, and we're talking about all various manifestations of it, in terms of drawing us into a world, into different worlds, into multiple worlds, into the worlds of common folk. So I think those are really some of the key themes I wanted to touch on. Did you want to touch on another question or?
I think that street art is really fascinating, and I think it's really interesting because street art is kind of for the people by the people. And I think
Mhm.
that that's kind of why or at least this is the impression that I get, that's why you're seeing these um,
Pro Chavez,
pro Chavez
yes,
pieces of art,
pro revolution.
pro revolution, because it is for the people by the people, in the name of the people. I guess that leads into, what is the difference between a mural and a street art? So what is the difference
Yeah,
between my art here in Anchorage, Alaska that I can walk around and find versus the street art?
yeah, yeah. So murals are coming out of the great Italian mural tradition of probably what 16th, maybe 15th and 16th centuries, where you've got to do a foundation under the painting. So the mural is being being painted onto a plaster that's not going to easily break down unless you really destroy it, like what happened with one of Rivera's murals in New York City by the Rockefeller Center at the Rockefeller Center. Versus street art, there tends not to be, an underpinning base to it that's going to enable it to be lasting for decades. Okay, so that at the core of it, mural art is expensive. The ways in which mural art took off in Mexico was that the revolutionary state is giving big sums of money to these artists to be able to prepare the underpinnings, pay for the art, pay for the paint that's going to be able to be perpetuated, to be preserved for decades ahead. They also get paid by wealthy patrons, the Ford family in Detroit, the Rockefeller family in New York, some rich donors in San Francisco. They all come north. Dartmouth College creates an endowment to enable Orozco to do some brilliant paintings in their library, which I've seen. So I would say that the cost of that versus, and these are, by the way, I would also say the muralists tend to be very advanced trained artists. Okay, so they have studied, they've trained, they have a long, extensive artistic background. Street art, I think, tends to be far less expensive, very often ranging from quite advanced to not so advanced. But and I would say the capacity to do it is far less expensive because they're not preparing an underpinning with plaster on the walls to be able to have it last for a long time. That's not to say that there aren't some murals that have been put up in Caracas and have, done pretty well. They've stayed. There's a very famous one of the portrayal of the 1989 explosion of the street, and that was a mural versus street art that tends to be less permanent. So I think that's a good answer for that.
Yeah, and I think that's really fascinating because it is one of those things that you have to catch it while it's there. Is there a certain sense, as like a historian, that is there a rush to be able to document some of these pieces of street art while they're still around? When I was in Idaho, I did a story with Justin Vipperman out at the College of Southern Idaho about arbor glyphs, which are carvings in trees. And those trees don't last forever, so there's kind of a rush to save them. Would you say that there's kind of
Right,
a similar effort?
right. I would say that it's an ongoing. Yeah, I don't want to call it a rush, but you can't count on it being there. Let's put it that way. Right now, when I watch this interesting portrayal by the motorcycle lady, Nora Lee from the Netherlands, she went looking for a Banksy that was quite famous, and it had been painted over. Can you freaking believe it? I mean, Banksy is the most advanced artist who's done some of the most brilliant street art, and it had been painted over. But she then found some of the other ones. A couple had been defaced. Um, One of the very famous ones where the guy's hanging, and it's called A Well Hung Lover, has been defaced. In my own experience, amazingly, my friends who had done this huge public square that included Fidel and Che Guevara and Simon Bolivar, it was defaced. It was defaced. So I had photographed it. I noticed one day, maybe 6 months later, that some people were painting over it, and that collective went and threw black paint over what the people had done to their original art. So there's battles that go on. Obviously, there are battles that go on with regards to this. I would also say that clearly, in terms of under Chavez, this was radical stuff. So there were clearly people out to deface it, to shut it down, paint over it. So again, you get it, and hopefully you have it, and you keep moving. So
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, it is very it's a battle of, like, how do you record this in real time? How do you know it's going to be something that lasts? That type of conversation you have to have with yourself. And so, would this street art be similar to what Americans would call graffiti?
that's a very interesting question. So again, in the same sense that I feel there's a difference between murals and street art, I feel that there's a difference between street art and graffiti. Now, do they overlap? Yes, I would say they overlap on certain ways. But graffiti tends to be, I would say, very much, for me, graffiti does not necessarily have a social message. It has a message maybe of who a gang, or an individual who wants to become famous through their graffiti. It's a very good question you're asking, by the way. Whereas I feel that street art is, on a certain level, a little bit more formal and brings along a social message, which I don't feel graffiti often necessarily is bringing with it. Now, is there graffiti that has a message? Yes, I'm sure there is. Is it hard to interpret sometimes? I think it is. Is it destructive sometimes? I really think it is, because I see it a lot here. Graffiti that destroys buildings. A graffiti artist might be hearing this and saying, how can you possibly be saying that? Isn't street art doing the same thing? Except that I've seen enough street art whereby there's also a handwritten message with it. One of the best pictures that I have is of bombs. And it is, why don't we have intellectual bombs instead of bombs killing people? Something like that. I'd have to go back and look at it to remember what it was. Where the graffiti is not so articulated. I don't feel the graffiti messages are as well articulated as are some of the phrases that are clearly written with the street art. So that to me would be one distinguishing characteristic. There are also many, many elements of street art where they're quoting someone: Che Guevara, Simon Bolivar, Fidel Castro, the list, Salvador Allende. The list goes on in terms of women who were involved in the liberation movement of independence. Some of the intellectuals of the 19th and 20th century in Venezuela are vividly portrayed through the street art, which I don't feel I'm getting a sense through graffiti. I don't get the same vibe from graffiti. It's never drawn me in.
Gotcha. So the street art is just more politically driven. It's got a more potent message than graffiti does.
I feel it's more, yes, and I think For me personally, it articulates messages more clearly. There you go. I think that's a better way to say that.
Gotcha. And so, how has the street art evolved? How has it changed over
Mm,
time?
over time. Well, I would say that one thing that I can speak to in the case of both, I'll speak to it in the case of Venezuela. With the emergence of Hugo Chavez, and the fact that his Fifth Republic movement was very much oriented towards sort of trying to resonate with common folk. I think the investment was there was far more money being placed into street art than had been the case before. So street art pre Chavez, I don't feel like it was I don't feel like it was in the 80s and into the 90s. I don't feel like it was something relevant. I don't feel like it was a big movement. Whereas after he comes in from 1999 on, and right up until today, I would suggest in the case of Venezuela and in the case of Caracas, I would say that it has proliferated dramatically. And, just far many more people doing it, being paid to getting support to help them do it. And, which in turn means that they're able more eloquently to get out the message. I can give you one example, what I'm trying to get at, and that would be some very fine street art is, the message would be, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe international media, or are you going to believe your local radio station that's being supported by the government? So again, I would say that it's not necessarily so much of a transformation as just a blossoming after the revolutionary government comes in, recognizing that their form of media, their form of articulating their revolutionary message could happen through the street art, which I don't think previous governments were tuned into. Their art was much more, I would say, formal art. Was the art of of uh, of cafes, the art of paintings, the art of the elite. It wasn't something that was being brought out into the streets. The streets were below. The art was something more European, more formal, more elite, more bourgeois. That's really where the art was taking place. Street art was part of the revolution. Street art was part of the revolution. And I would say that this is played out. There's some very good work out there, by the way, in terms of their model is coming out of places like Nicaragua, their revolution of 1979, and Cuba's revolution of 1959. Fidel Castro was quite cognizant of using billboards and art, street art, to in homage to the revolution. And Chavez, who's debating what he's going to do in 1999 after he wins the presidency, basically starts talking to Fidel Castro and says, I think we're going to try to model our revolution on your revolution. And one of the examples was going to be through the street art. So those are some of the connections. Oh, by the way, I would suggest that under Salvador Allende from 1970 to 1973, there was an explosion of street art also, and which all gets shut down under the Pinochet dictatorship. They completely erase that historical memory because, in fact, it's radical, it's socialism, it's common people, it's the street. They don't want it. So I'm hoping that's a good answer.
I think it's a great answer. And I guess this kind of brings me to we mentioned a little bit ago about how street art, and I guess art in general, is kind of for the people, by the means of the people, right? Like, why is there this is for our right-wing audience, I suppose. Why is there no right-wing street art? Or why does it seem like there isn't as much right-wing street art?
You know, I don't know. I feel like they pursue this in other ways. You know, they wear MAGA hats. That's a form of art. I feel like I don't necessarily want to say that they're not. I think that there's an element of the right wing, particularly with the resurgence of the right wing since the 2010s, let's put it that way, where maybe the art is taking place in other manifestations, like, for example, through social media. So I have no fault, Facebook, no Instagram, none of this, but they're very adept at, the right wing, ranging all the way from the fascist right to the conservative right to the middle of the road right, have proven themselves to be extremely adept at using symbols, messaging, art to portray, to get their messages across, which range from gun rights to cynicism of the left. The list, we could go down the whole list of what their messages are versus what a more liberal portrayal of the world is about. But I mean, a good case study, a good example that I would give is the way in which how adept they have been at sort of trying to darken people's faces, or cynically portray somebody like Obama as not legitimate, using bananas as symbols of anti-black. That's something. There's something right across the Americas and Europe, and you'll notice that with the right wing now has forced FIFA, the international soccer body, to tone down the anti-racist messaging that's gone on. Well, I would suggest that the right-wing messaging has never been so strong in terms of using media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, etc., for their form of street art, their form of messaging. I'm hoping that's making sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really solid answer. The thing that I've noticed, you mentioned that you don't actually engage on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. There has been a rapid increase of, I don't even want to call it art, but AI generated content.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that it is, primarily coming from the right. Do you think that like maybe that's there? Like, could that, is there such a thing as digital street art? Oh,
I Let's see here. Please
my
run.
my camera just died. It's all right. Keep going.
Okay, because I'm seeing that something's up. Yeah. I just think we're facing the beginning of AI. So if you're feeling that already, this is just the beginning. But I just think there's massive disinformation out there. I think there's massive attempts at hacking. I think that we're in World War right now in certain ways with Russia. So all of these things, I think, are playing into this hostility toward intellect. And listen, there's a brilliant book, Richard Hofstadter, 1962, Anti-Intellectualism in American Thought. I think it's just a classic, and I just think that a whole lot of people who are not particularly interested in following closely politics or what's going on. These are the people who voted for Donald Trump, are easily influenced by some of this very basic, crass disinformation, this AI-generated disinformation. Sobering stuff.
Yeah, it is certainly going to be something as we go into the future here, which we'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see where that shakes out. I think there's only one more thing that do you think that it's because, right, like, street art, pro-revolution, pro-Chavez, there is this sense that doing street art is an act of rebellion, and I think that that ideal kind of clashes with what the conservative viewpoint of the world is, right? Because they want to maintain the status quo. Do you think that has anything to do with it, or do you think it's more like just kind of, we're going to express ourselves in different ways?
Yeah, I think both of those points resonate with me. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of people who are into the international art world. Um, you know, they want to purchase a Banksy, but they're not particularly interested in walking the streets to see Banksy, real Banksy in the streets. So yes, I think, and I do think that there's a real deep bias, which potentially maybe has some of its roots in graffiti because of the painting on the subways, for example, in New York, the beginnings of graffiti, which destroyed buildings and destroyed carriages of trains, etc. That maybe create an inherent bias for a whole lot of folks of various backgrounds towards street art, which I can understand. I can understand that. But yes, I do think it's two different worlds. I think for me, there's the world of formal art and people wanting to buy, I'm trying to think of who the guy is from Pittsburgh, anyway, who want to buy sort of pop art for their nice homes versus people who are going to work every day. And I see them heading to the subway through the rain today, where I think some street art can potentially give them some inspiration, can potentially bring them a message of hope, can affirm that they are hardworking folks, that maybe their life can improve. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you think we've covered this topic pretty well? I think we've gotten a pretty good overview of it. Dale, if people liked what they've heard from you today, where can they find more of your work? And
they can go to Amazon or a couple of these platforms that have it's a self-published book because nobody is going to publish anything in this country on Venezuela. So, and I'm happy you can get in touch with me, Graden at uidaho.edu, and I can send you chapters easily, which I own. And, I just think that it's my pleasure. I would conclude by saying I really do believe academics, people in universities, have a role to play in terms of public sharing of their work, public intellectuals. And I really try to live by that on a daily basis. So, yeah, they can easily get in touch with me.
Yeah, and I think everybody appreciates when you can get some education for free because it is supposed to be for the people, by the people, by the means of the people.
Absolutely.
Dale, thank you so much. We'll have you back on the show again soon. We'll talk about another topic.
You're a good man. I appreciate that you invited me. So you take care.
Yeah, you too. We'll talk soon. I'm so sorry about the time delay. That was so my fault.
Not a problem.
We'll talk again soon.
You have a good evening. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I want to personally thank Dale Graden for appearing on the program and explaining the difference between graffiti and street art for me. I hope to have him on again soon. I am Justin Matson. You can find me on Facebook at Matson News and other plugs once I have them. The show is The Stories Your City Forgot.